This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Two big stories tonight involving your tax money. First, 50% pay increases for Congress, federal judges, and other high government officials are all but dead. House Speaker Jim Wright has caved in, and the House is now set to cast the killer vote tomorrow. Second, President Bush officially today proposed spending billions more taxpayer dollars on the savings and loan bailout, part of a complicated plan to try and rescue dozens of thrifts ruined by deregulation, bungling, and corruption. CBS News White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews begins our coverage of the bailout plan, Mr. Bush's first major domestic policy decision, and what it's likely to cost you.
Answering his first major challenge, President Bush proposes to bail out the savings and loans using a combination of industry and taxpayer money. The president promises the bailout, combined with an overall package of financial reform, will solve the S&L crisis once and for all.
We got a major problem, and something has to be done. And this is the fairest system that the best minds in this administration can come up with.
Mr. Bush explicitly ruled out the idea of a direct fee paid by depositors, which his own administration had defended 2 weeks ago. Under his current proposal, the government would borrow $50 billion over the next 3 years by issuing bonds. The interest payments on these bonds would come partly from the general treasury, adding an average of $4 billion a year to the federal deficit. What taxpayers don't pay, banks and savings and loans will, through an increase in the premiums they pay for federal deposit insurance. Banks would suffer the biggest jump, their premiums almost doubling by 1991. The institutions are free to pass that added cost along to customers.
There is no guarantee of passing this on to the consumer, nor is there a guarantee it won't be passed on.
The president also wants to drastically reshape the system, taking immediate control of insolvent S&Ls, providing more money to prosecute those responsible for fraud, and tightening the rules for S&L operations of the future.
There will be no more windmill farms, no prize cattle herds financed by federally guaranteed deposits.
To ensure that kind of control, the plan would also merge the administrative functions of the S&L insurance system into the FDIC, which is the bank's insurance program. That proposal would place the entire insurance fund under the control of the Treasury. Reaction in Congress is generally favorable, but some ask, what is the president giving up?
Where does that money come from? If it's going to be spent that way, will there be pressure to take it out of Medicare or take it out of education or out of the war on drugs?
Ironically, all that controversy about making depositors fund this bailout has actually helped the president politically. By dropping the idea of having depositors pay, it's easier for the president to now ask that all taxpayers share the load. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
The president's program is designed to stop lines like this. Anxious depositors trying to withdraw their money from failing savings and loans. Regulations will be tightened up on them. At this healthy thrift in California today, executives watched the president and seemed relieved.
But we have a major problem in this country. We have to attack it head on, because if we don't attack it promptly, the problem will just get larger.
Altogether, the government must come up with around $100 billion to bail out the nation's savings and loans, an industry that has been racked by scandal, bad management, and outright fraud at some thrifts. Its losses amount to $375 for every man, woman, and child in the U.S. Critics say the government's plan to have banks and savings and loans pay higher premiums for their deposit insurance could hurt some of the S&Ls.
The higher insurance premiums may very well be the difference between survival or insolvency for savings and loans on the borderline.
Any additional cost to any business has to be recovered eventually. And in that sense, you could have a higher price on loans, for example. That might be how you would partially recover this cost.
Americans may feel the cost in another way, critics say, even though it won't show up on the government's books.
While on the books it looks like the taxpayers aren't paying, in reality they're going to be out another $5 or $6 billion a year.
President Bush, though, met that criticism head on.
Nothing is without pain, and when you come to solve a problem of this magnitude.
As even critics admit, the bottom line here is that finally something is being done about one of the nation's toughest financial problems, and that should help savers breathe a bit more easily. Dan?
Thanks, Ray. As you know, more than 1,000 savings and loans have failed or are in deep trouble. And much of the S&L money mess is believed to stem from outright looting from the inside by thrift officials. It didn't take many. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver reports now on what does and doesn't happen to them after the money disappears.
President Bush's announcement sounded very much like a response to critics who've complained that the Justice Department has not put enough crooked savings and loan executives in prison.
We plan to increase the budget of the Justice Department by approximately $50 million to enable it to create a nationwide program to seek out and punish those that have committed wrongdoing in the management of these failed institutions.
The FBI estimates that up to 90% of all S&L failures involve some kind of fraud, but so far in the last few years, only about 140 individuals have been convicted. Empire Savings and Loan in Mesquite, Texas failed in 1984. The trial of executives indicted for squandering funds just began today. Each case takes hundreds of hours of work by already swamped FBI agents and U.S. attorneys.
We'll see schemes that are more and more complex that involve setting up of shell corporations into which money is funneled and from one shell corporation to another.
But why has it taken the Justice Department so long to pour on the pressure?
We have been waiting the signal from the White House, which came today, to enable us to enhance our resources and capabilities in this area.
Another problem, juries have acquitted some indicted S&L executives. One FBI official explained, these guys are pillars of their communities. Juries just won't believe they're stealing money, just the same as a guy who robs a bank with a gun. Dan?
Thank you, Rita. And now about tonight's other top story. The pay increases for Congress, federal judges, and other government officials that seemed all but sure to take effect Wednesday, but are now Potomac dead ducks. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer reports on the latest and seemingly fatal pay raise twist.
As House members left the Capitol today, all sides agreed tomorrow's vote means the pay raise is dead.
I am slightly more convinced that this will go down tomorrow than I am that the sun will go up tomorrow.
The decision to bring the issue to a vote came after a pro forma House session broke into such acrimony that a congresswoman who favored the raise vowed to tattle on opponents who took the money if it passed.
I'm going to watch who you are, and I'm going to go and tell your constituents if you take that pay raise.
It got even hotter as opponents demanded a vote.
We have deservedly brought down on this House the disgust of the American people, 99% of whom earn less than we.
It finally came to a head when those who favored the raise tried to adjourn until Thursday so the raise would kick in automatically without a vote.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today...
But when opponents blocked adjournment, House Speaker Wright backed off his pledge of no vote.
It is apparent to me, and I think to all of us, that a majority of the members desire to have a vote, up or down. We should have that vote in the House tomorrow. The majority will rule.
Why the sudden switch?
I think that the Speaker of the House was hung out to dry on this issue, and when he also saw that a lot of us were running away from the proposal, he made the wise decision today by just scheduling a vote tomorrow.
But many House Democrats secretly wanted the raise and wanted Wright to take the heat for them by refusing to let it come to a vote. Now they are furious, and some of them even say Wright's support among his colleagues has been weakened. Bob Schieffer, CBS News at the Capitol.
John Tower is still hanging out there, but President Bush said today that Senator Tower still has his, and I quote, wholehearted endorsement to be the new defense secretary. President Bush said none of the accusations about Tower's personal and professional life had been borne out by the facts. Mr. Bush's latest support for Tower comes as various sources were telling CBS News that up to a dozen new accusations about Tower are now being checked by the FBI. It is not known whether this will further delay Senate Armed Services Committee plans to vote by midweek on recommending Tower's confirmation to the full Senate. After embarrassing disclosures and criticism, the ethics advisor to President Bush did an about-face today. White House counsel C. Boyden Gray has now agreed to put his own financial assets in a blind trust and resign from a multi-million-dollar family-owned communications business that paid him fees. President Bush said today that Gray's moves do not mean Gray did anything wrong or unethical. And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, correspondent Richard Schlesinger on Kitty Dukakis entering an alcohol treatment center. And correspondent Peter Van Sant on a dog whose popularity is climbing.
That's good. Can you say that about your liquid antacid? If not, taste new Tums Liquid.
It has a nice taste to it. It's delicious. Tums tastes the best.
New Tums Liquid. It works, and it really tastes good.
Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze ended talks in Pakistan today, apparently unable to reach a last-ditch agreement on a political settlement for Afghanistan. He said Moscow will continue to support the communist government in Kabul, but will not send troops back in to defend it. Shevardnadze spoke as the last Red Army units retreated out of Kabul, moved up the road from the capital to the Soviet border. CBS News correspondent Barry Peterson is covering the retreat.
The convoy of paratroopers rolled across the Friendship Bridge at midday. The armored personnel carriers and tanks bedecked with red flags. They left behind almost a decade of bloodshed and more than 13,000 Soviet soldiers dead. There was a brass band, speeches of praise, and the young pioneers. You helped our neighbor Afghanistan. You did your duty. You are heroes. It is good to be home, he says. Very, very good. Relatives and sweethearts gathered for the ceremony held barely a half-mile from the border. For some, there was reunion. For some, disappointment. Where is my son, she wanted to know. Don't worry, she was told. There are more soldiers coming in a few days. These may be the last Soviet troops to leave Kabul, but they are not the last Soviet troops in Afghanistan. There are still several thousand spread across 5 northern provinces. They man lonely outposts, some recently built to protect the Soviet withdrawal routes. Soon they will be convoying home too. Meanwhile, the Afghan government is facing a stranglehold on food supplies to Kabul amid fears that an estimated 30,000 children may die of malnutrition because food is running so short. It was the Soviet army that kept the convoy routes open and the food supplies flowing to Kabul. But our part in this war, said one soldier, is done. Barry Peterson, CBS News, on the Soviet-Afghanistan border.
The communist rulers of Poland sat down with leaders of the outlawed Solidarity Union today, and both sides said they will try to work together to save the country from further economic ruin. Correspondent Bert Quint covered the start of those roundtable talks.
It was clear today, as delegates arrived for this historic meeting, that political life in Poland and perhaps throughout the East Bloc will never be the same. And the cries of the crowd, down with communism, seemed to echo in the conference hall where members of the regime and men who oppose it sat down together. The fact that a group openly called the opposition has been invited to negotiate with a communist regime is unprecedented in this part of the world. It amounts to de facto recognition, not just of solidarity, but of a political movement that does not follow the lead of the Communist Party.
We are really treating the opposition and their attitude and their view as the constructive element of the system of ruling of this country.
6 months ago, many of these opposition delegates were considered little more than bandits. Some spent years in jail for saying what Lech Wałęsa said today. The country is in ruins because of the system of power that robs citizens of their rights and wastes the fruit of their work. Wałęsa and his team are being asked to share the responsibility and the risk of blame for political, economic, and social change intended to stop Poland's slide toward poverty. The deaths of 2 pro-solidarity priests in 2 weeks gives rise to suspicion that communist hardliners are trying to sabotage the talks. But when communists and opposition delegates rose to honor the 2 dead priests, it seemed that it would take more than murder to halt the process that began here today. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis said his wife was suffering the after effects of the long and hard presidential campaign. CBS News correspondent Richard Schlesinger reports on the pressure, the limelight, and the letdown.
The next First Lady of the nation, ladies and gentlemen. Kitty Dukakis campaigned tirelessly for her husband during his failed presidential campaign. And today, Governor Michael Dukakis said it was the campaign that drove his wife to drink.
She's never had a problem with alcohol until after the election. But she clearly has one. She recognizes it.
Dukakis said his wife voluntarily entered the Edge Hill Newport treatment facility in Rhode Island last night. It is her second bout with chemical dependency. 2 years ago, Mrs. Dukakis announced she had ended a 26-year addiction to diet pills. Since then, she has become an outspoken advocate for drug and alcohol education.
I have been free of chemicals since July of 1982. Life is sweeter. Don't take a day off from the kind of positive life that you can lead after Jefferson High School.
The next president, Michael Dukakis.
A statement issued by the governor's office blamed Mrs. Dukakis' alcohol problem on physical exhaustion, the stress of the campaign, and the post-election letdown.
She's going to be a good patient. She understands herself. I'm married to a very courageous person.
Well, since the election, Kitty Dukakis has been busy lecturing and working on a book. And at his press conference today, Governor Dukakis said he expects his wife to resume her activities as soon as her treatment is over in about 30 days. Dan?
Thank you, Richard. Historian Barbara Tuchman, winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, died today in Greenwich, Connecticut. Cause, complications following a stroke. Barbara Tuchman was 77. Paraguay called reporters to the National Palace today to vehemently deny reports that he is a big-time drug dealer. He said he will cooperate with foreign governments, including the United States, to stop the flow of drugs through Paraguay. Rodriguez took power in a bloody coup last week. Today, he set elections for the 1st of May. Panama has also scheduled elections for May, and although he is not on the ticket, military strongman Manuel Noriega is still very much in charge, despite what was said to have been a year-long U.S. effort to oust him as a drug trafficker. Correspondent Juan Vasquez returned to Panama for this report.
For General Noriega, it's a perfect ticket. His business manager as president, his brother-in-law as first vice president, and as second vice president, a former ambassador to Washington who claims to be an old friend of President Bush.
And I have great respect from him, and this is an 18-year relationship.
As proof, Boyd has many personal letters and a display case full of pictures. Bush as CIA director, Bush as vice president, even pictures with the Reagans. The friendship will make it even harder for President Bush to resolve a crisis no one in Washington expected to last this long.
The U.S. policy during all of 1988 toward Panama was an absolute unqualified disaster. First of all, they began the year by indicting somebody they couldn't get their hands on, and thereby locking him into Panama.
To celebrate Reagan's departure, Noriega held a street party. The message, Reagan's gone, I'm still here. Many believe Noriega wants to stay until the United States has to turn over the Panama Canal in the year 2000. Meanwhile, he's tried to focus attention on the canal and on U.S. imperialism, and away from U.S. charges of drug dealing.
General Noriega is a great patriot and the best soldier that the defense forces have ever had.
The opposition says he can't fool Panama's voters.
He is the regime, and that this election is about him. Then there's no honest-to-goodness way for him to win an election. He knows it.
The prospect for a fair fight is dim. Opposition newspapers and other outlets remain closed. Many of those who led last year's demonstrations remain in exile. This is Carnival Week, a time for Panamanians to forget about their problems, an economy in shambles, record unemployment, and uncertain future. When the dancing ends, they must face up to an election campaign in which, once again, Noriega calls the tune. Juan Vasquez, CBS News, Panama City.
See that words take on a different meaning. The command, go climb a tree, may strike most ears as less than friendly, but for one of Earth's creatures, it's meant something like fame and something like fortune. Peter Van Sant has this you won't believe it till you see it story.
Hey, you want it, huh?
What you're about to see is a cat's ultimate nightmare.
Go get it there.
Flatnose may be the only tree-climbing dog in the world. His owner, Barney Odom of Dovesville, South Carolina, says Flatnose took to trees at a young age.
And one day I was in the front yard when he's about a year old. He went up a pine tree. I said, well, I'll be doggone if old Flatnose can't climb a tree. And he been climbing ever since. Hey, Flatnose, you see it? Go get it.
Local veterinarians say Flatnose's behavior is a mystery.
And seeing it happen is just one more thing that happens in this world that you don't normally see. And I think it's a unique quirk of nature, but it happens.
Flatnose may be the world's best-known flea-bitten celebrity.
You gonna let him go get the pillow?
He's made the talk show circuit. During a recent football game, Flatnose brought more than 50,000 fans to their feet. But it is in Japan where Flatnose is king of the canines. He's appeared on nationwide television shows and hounded viewers in commercials.
I've been to Japan with him. I seen stuff over there I couldn't believe. Them Japanese, all of them knows him over there.
Flatnose has managed to put Dovesville, population 183, on the map. It's been a mixed blessing for local merchants who have to deal with curious tourists.
And when they come through, all they want to know is where is the dog.
South Carolina's known for its country people and good old boys and things that sometimes are true and are not, but this is one story that'll linger on forever.
Flatnose is something, ain't you, boy? Yeah, he's my baby, yeah.
Flatnose's popularity is expected to climb, as long as he continues to climb. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Dovesville, South Carolina.
As the man said, doggone. That's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
Hey, do you want it? Do you want it? Hey, Flatnose, do you want it? Go get it then. Hey, go, Flatnose.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, the Bush plan to solve the savings and loan crisis.
Also, Glenn Close and the selling of Andy Warhol tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Mischief